Okay, so Dr. Holub, thank you so much for being here today. Before we get into the heavy stuff, can you share a little about your background and what got you into psychology?
Sure. I was one of those kids who didn't really know what I wanted to be when I grew up for a very long time, but I realized I really liked helping people. So when I went to college, I decided to major in psychology, because that's what, the major, if you like to help people, that's what you should do. So I took my very first psychology class and learned from my introductory psychology professor that psychology was really a science and that we could study it very systematically. And he really made me sort of grow in my passion and the for the science of psychology, which was really cool. That was inspirational, and I kind of just went on from there and found my niche in what I like to do in psychology.
That's cool. So what inspired you to study topics like body image, fat bias, and socialization in children?
Absolutely. I've been interested for a long time about children's self-perceptions, why children come to think about themselves in the way that they do. And did my dissertation work on why little kids think they're great at things, even if they aren't. And so at the same time, I was thinking all about the development of kids' self-perceptions. I was working on a research team where we were trying to come up with some cool projects. And we wanted to start a new research project. One of my colleagues read a study on fat bias in adults, and we started to think about whether or not that would be something that you'd even see in children. And so we went to the research literature and we started reading all about it, and we realized that the literature was small and it was also pretty bad. Like the science was really bad. Like we figured if we changed the measures and asked in a more systematic way, that little kids actually wouldn't show much bias. And then we did the study. And we realized that even with our brand new measures, even in a really systematic way, kids were still showing lots of horrible bias toward white
Right.
peers at 4, and they were saying really horrible things about, chubby looking peers.
Yeah.
And that they were expressing negativity about their own bodies in ways that were really early on at 4 and 5 years old. So we were sort of shocked, and we were like, this is really horrible for the world that kids this young feel that way and start developing these things early, but really good for a developing research program. So I've really been passionate about learning more about how those things develop and what parents can do, because we know that there's so many messages from all over, from media, from, things that kids are exposed to, but really thinking about, what is the role of parents and how can parents support children to sort of develop a healthy body image and healthy attitudes toward others.
Right. So how do you think this research connects to mental health challenges that Asian teens face today?
Absolutely. So I've done a few research studies thinking about sort of Asian families and teens. One study, for example, we were interested in some of the feeding practices that we see that are more problematic in sort of, white middle class families, right? So we notice, for example, that when parents use more controlling feeding practices, that leads to more negative outcomes for kids. But what I had experience in, even in my own sort of family that I've built, was that controlling feeding practices was more normal, right, in other
Right.
cultures, like in the South Asian culture. And so that really got us interested in reading more about it. And so we started doing some projects where we looked at whether there were differences in the way parents fed for very early on. I've had many students who were interested in topics like, what do we know about body image in Asian youth, right?
Uh,
Because there's sort of different processes by which one might feel more negative about themselves, right? So like there's these Western thin ideals that Asian youth may or may not experience and sort of internalize, but there's also seems to be in the Asian community sort of this desire for thinness too that comes from other
right.
sources. So
Right.
it's been a topic that we've been interested in and done some research on. Of course, we have a lot more to go. Also, I'm at a university at UTD where we have quite a lot of Asian students there, students who have come from either South Asia backgrounds
Mm.
or East Asian backgrounds who just have their own passionate interests about learning more about their cultures and communities, and that
Yeah.
drives what we do too.
What are
Yeah.
some of the biggest mental health risks for Asian teens today, based on your research?
Oh, goodness. That's a really good question. I mean, I think that some of these are the same risk factors for all teens, right? Like the fact that we live in this kind of go, go, go grind culture, right? Where
Mhm.
there's high expectations on our youth, right, for success in lots of different ways. And I think we see that play out a lot in Asian families, right? Sort of this idea that they have to excel at academics, they have to excel at music or sports, what other activities they're doing. And I think that's a real risk, right?
Yeah.
The reality is not everyone can be the valedictorian or the top of their class. Not everyone can get A's all of the time. Not everyone can be the star of the play or the best in that instrument. And so I think that's really concerning, right? Those high expectations, but also things like if we think about Asian Americans being in a group that, especially over the last couple of years, has experienced some stigma, especially related to COVID and the pandemic, right? And there are some of these kind of concerns about and real deep experiences with discrimination and mistreatment that occur in that community. And I think those actual experiences, along with sort of this idea of a sort of model minority myth, right? That you
Yeah.
have to be sort of this certain way within your culture, just leads to a lot of um, self-expectations that are really hard, right? Like it's hard to do all of those things. So those are it creates a very risky environment for our Asian teens.
Right. We can see that like in our school too. There's so many like Asians like our friends, for example. I can name like
Yeah.
at least five who like their parents want them to be the best of the best. They want them to be like top 5% in the whole school and then become a doctor or engineer. And that just like that can take a toll to their mental health, like overall.
Yeah. Well, and I have to, and adding to that, I mean, so that continues, right? So like this is an important developmental period in high school, right? Where you're figuring
Right.
out who you are, and that continues into college. And so a lot of the students that I talk with on a regular basis who are in my lab, who are in my classes, who come to talk with me at office hours, I mean, these are students who, you know, feel very strongly that they need to do what their parents want them to do, but
Right.
they themselves have gotten to a sort of developmental phase where they realize, like, actually, I don't want to do medicine or I don't want to
Mhm.
do this. I'm really interested in, and usually it's because they're coming to talk to me. They'll say, I'm actually really interested in psychology and I really want to major in psychology and I really want to be in a career path that would be around psychology, but I don't think my parents would let me because they expect me to be a doctor or they expect me to be an engineer.
Right.
And I think those are really that can feel really stressful too,
Yeah,
right? When you
for sure.
don't have that autonomy to sort of find your own path.
Yeah, that's really true. So, what role do cultural values play in shaping mental health for Asian youth?
Well, I mean, I think that, the values that individual cultures sort of endorse can either serve as what we call in psychology like risk factors, right? There are
Yeah.
things that we know promote more negative behaviors or negative attitudes, or they can be protective or promotive factors, right? So things that might actually support and provide support for folks. So we actually just are in the process of trying to publish some research right now in which we looked at the two cultural values in an ethnically diverse sample. So it included Asian youth, but it also included Hispanic and Latina youth
Mhm.
and others from diverse communities. And essentially, what we were looking at in that study was the cultural value of familism, right? This idea of like being connected to your family and feeling support and cohesion from your family, which we thought would be more of like a protective factor, right? So if you feel
Yeah.
like your family, you feel a strong sense of family obligation, you feel a strong sense of family support, that's going to protect you. But then we also looked at a more risk factor, which we, after looking at the literature, thought about sort of traditional gender roles as being more of a risk factor,
Yeah.
especially for body image, right? So
Right.
if you're endorsing that, women have to act in this way and men have to act in this way,
Yeah.
that can be a real risk. So
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of these kind of cultural values, and what we found actually in that study was that both familism and traditional gender roles were related to body image, right? In ways you'd
Uh-huh.
expect, right? So those who
Yeah.
felt, stronger sense of c- protection from their families, tend to have more body appreciation, less body dissatisfaction, and those with traditional gender role beliefs had more negative body image. But we were also sort of interested in like whether those values sort of help to buffer from like acculturative stress. Do you know what acculturative stress is? Have you heard much about that topic?
No, could you expand on that?
Yeah, so we have this idea of like it's the specific stressors that come from being either first or second generation
Right.
and sort of experiencing acculturation, right? So, the stressors that come from, trying to, like for second generation youth, trying to translate for parents who may not fully understand or
Yeah.
have the language of the culture you're in. Acculturation stress could also just be like recognizing, like, hey, your family has values this thing and your culture, your new community that you're trying to enmesh with values this thing. And so we were interested in sort of whether cultural values could lessen the impacts of acculturative stress,
Yeah.
right? So like if you
Yeah.
feel connected to your family, even though you feel stressed about the experiences you have, that could actually kind of promote more protection than if you did not have that connection. And we found some evidence of that in our study.
Yeah, that actually goes exactly to our next question. Do you see differences in mental health experiences between first and second generation Asian teens?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the research literature suggests that there's quite a few differences. I mean, with both groups having potential risks, right? And
Yeah.
you kind of think about, why there's risk. It kind of comes from sort of the different roles that they're playing, right? So our first
Right.
generation uh, you know, um, youth and individuals are dealing with the actual like trying to navigate these things, right? Like, so my husband has told me the story about like his very first time trying to order an ice cream cone from Wendy's, right? And how
Right.
stressful that was, right? Like just simple sort of things like navigate, that we think of simple like as navigating in a brand new culture, right? And so that's
Right.
going to lead to lots of stressors. But I think for our second generation youth, right, they are experiencing sort of the strong expectations from their parents, and the culture that, and the cultural values that their parents have, while also really trying to navigate and trying to sometimes, in some ways, help their families navigate those things. So there's quite a big literature on sort of the stressful experiences that second generation youth have when they're having to do things like navigate systems that their parents just can't quite navigate as first
Yeah.
generation immigrants, right? And that might
Right.
be directly in the language or just having like the more comprehensive understanding of the things that some parents, first generation parents, don't end up having.
Yeah. Right.
You can see that. So yeah, there's what the research sort of says is there's stress for both groups, but of course the reasons for the stress can vary.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
Does saving face value have a big impact on mental health in Asian teens?
So, I mean, so this idea of wanting to be a sort of perfect model minority to be able to, look good, definitely doesn't allow you to admit your mistakes. It doesn't allow you to ask for help, right? So if you're not able to, if asking for help is perceived as a weakness, then you're not able to seek the support that you need, right? So
Yeah.
certainly can be problematic.
So all of these like factors like saving face, model minority, are there any like protective factors within cultures or outside where like over time we can implement it into cultures which can help support teen mental health?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I think, this, especially if we're thinking about, Asian cultures with the strong emphasis on collectivism and being part of a community and being
Right.
connected to family, I think that can be an incredible protective factor, right?
Yeah.
Especially as families become more aware of the challenges that their kiddos and teens are facing, right? And especially as they're sort of working together through these acculturative stressors, right? Like there's these benefits for, sort of feeling connected to your group, that could come, right? Like you can see the
Yeah, for
risks
sure.
of that, but I think there's benefits too, especially when parents are and can be more sensitive, responsive to
Yeah.
their teens' needs, right? And I mean that's kind of at the core of all the research that I've done on parenting, regardless of the culture community that you're working with. It's that sensitive, responsive caregiving is so impactful to all children and youth, right? And
Right.
so when parents can provide that, then kids are in better shape. And because they can ask for help, and if they're struggling, parents are more responsive and sensitive, and they probably see the struggles happening more
Yeah.
too, and they can catch it earlier on.
Yeah, and I think as time goes on, there's going to be more awareness like in Asian parents as well, because like mental health is starting to become more and more like commonly known about. So I think it's going to be easier to be able to address it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think about like even there's some really great research like going on in you know, in Asia, right? In like communities where, they're starting to do things like training like, aunties to like talk about like the importance of laughing and
Yeah,
community and building these kind of things and trying some of these interventions like where you're working within the community to sort of like, hey, this is how we can support each other through mental health. And it's going to be those smaller things, right? Like, because I think sometimes it's really hard for people to understand, and fully experience, like, well, this is what it means to suffer from depression, and this is what it means to have anxiety. But it's those, like maybe it's those smaller things like helping people understand the importance of feeling felt support or the
yeah,
importance of laughing and finding joy and these kind of things
right.
that might be sort of an in, right?
Yeah,
So maybe the community or culture or group or family hasn't fully bought into, mental health diagnoses yet, but maybe it's sort of those foundational things we can help teach them about, especially when elders in the community are participating.
yeah. Actually, like when I went to India myself, there was this one laughter group where they went like every morning and then they just like laughed like every single morning at like 7 a.m.
Yeah. And I mean those things, I mean it's taking like basic psychological principles, right? And sort of encouraging the community to be a part of to for people in the community to embrace that, right? Which I think can
Yeah,
be really impactful.
right. So, okay, now going on to your research in specific, how does social media affect body image in Asian teens, especially with beauty standards?
Yeah, social media is it impacts everyone in so many ways, right? Because it's these
Yeah,
constant messages that we have about what our body should look like, who we should be, how we should be, really driving those things. I think we're learning more and more about social media
right,
and its impact on teens. Because it's not just because back in the day when I first started this research, we really weren't thinking about social media. We were just thinking about all the media influences, right? So you're thinking
yeah,
about, how, seeing images of overly thin women, right? How does that impact people, right? And how does
right,
that exacerbate this sort of thin ideal for our culture? But now it's that because social media has all that information too, right? But it also has, people who are influencers like actively sort of sharing and showing how to engage in sometimes really problematic behaviors, right? Like,
yeah,
and
Mhm.
kind of almost sometimes making it cool to like, restrict calories or making it cool to, to try to change your appearance in some way. And so I think there's a lot of potential for harm when it
mhm,
comes to thinking about social media. And so, you know, it's a problem, right? And so I think like
yeah,
teens and adults, everyone needs to really pay attention to the types of things that they're watching, because
right.
those things that we watch and observe end up becoming part of what we think about, right?
Yeah, and that could just
I
be a
also would
huge
have to
fact.
go ahead, go ahead.
So like that could also be a huge factor in like anorexia and EDs because that's been like more and more like developing in Asian teens in specific, like according to statistics.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's there are these groups that one can access, in on social media through social media that are actually like these ways to sort of to talk about how to become more restrictive in your food, right?
Yeah,
That are really kind of dangerous. And these are things that kids weren't having and teens weren't having such easy access to before.
right.
Now they're sort of learning that parts of it. I always also like to say, though, every time I talk about social media and I kind of worry about all the negative, there is some data out there that suggests that social media can be used for good in some
Yeah,
ways, right? Just like
Mhm.
media can be used for good. It can connect teens together. It can help them feel supported.
for sure. Yeah.
Um, it's there's the downside to it too,
Yeah.
of
Yeah,
So I
so
course.
think
that
good and bad.
that leads us into our next question. What are some healthy ways that teens can develop a positive body image?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of things we can do to start to develop a positive body image. And first of it is just not focusing in on our bodies so much, right? Recognizing what
Hmm.
our bodies are, that our bodies are not for what they look like, or are seeing ourselves as objects in the world, but instead to remember that our bodies help move us through the world. They move our brains through the world. They move, they help us to get things done, right? And so this is sort of the approach we take with children and teens and thinking about like the strength of your body, right? Like your body isn't about what it looks like. It's about, what it can allow you to do and what good it can do in the world, right? So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
those are some of the ways we try to get people to think differently about their bodies because we know that so this idea of body objectification, right, which a lot of people experience, right? You see your body as an object, your body is treated like as an object by a lot of other people, is a real risk factor for body image. So if we try to lessen some of that, it can be really helpful. One of my students right now is doing a dissertation project where we're working with young teens. And essentially what we're trying to do is have daughters and mothers have conversations about bodies more often, right? Talking about these things, sharing together, you know, uh, having parents share concerns they have about their bodies so that they can then support each other, right? In this little intervention that we're doing, we're also asking moms and daughters to watch things and think about things like gender role objectification, right? Like these gender
Right.
roles that women especially are supposed to take on and think about how that impacts their bodies or so we're trying to basically start conversations between moms and daughters about bodies to help promote and protect
Mhm.
and develop a positive body image. So often we focus in on sort of the negative attitudes that people have toward their body or body
Right.
dissatisfaction, but we're starting to more and more think about sort of body appreciation
Hmm.
and bodily love and love for all shapes and sizes. And so trying to talk more about that.
Yeah.
Part of this also goes with some of the research I already talked about, the anti-fat bias that we
Hmm.
have, right? So when we create a culture that's more open to bodies and representing or recognizing that bodies at any size can be healthy, can also help promote positive body image.
Right. So that communication that you talked about with mothers and daughters, that seems like
Mhm.
really good. But if there was no communication, then what are some signs that parents should look out for if their teen is struggling? Not just like in body image, but like just mental health overall.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think for anything when you're looking for potential, challenges your teen is facing, I think looking for changes from your child's baseline or your teen's baseline
Yeah.
is important, right? So like your teen better than anyone else. So if you have someone a child or a teen living in your house who's really gregarious and very outgoing, and then all of a sudden they're not, like
Hmm.
finding out what is going on with that child because that might mean that there's something wrong. And so I think that's one of the things I always tell parents, right? Like just look
Yeah.
for changes, right? Because that's going to be problematic. But anytime our kiddos, especially when it goes beyond just who they are, like if a child's naturally shy and reticent and it's always been that way their whole life and they continue to be that way as teens, that may not be a risk factor. But if they're more shy, all of a sudden more shy, more withdrawn, more inward, we might wonder they're struggling right
Yeah.
now with some things, especially if that's unusual for them. So that's when I might try to ask questions and try to understand. On the other side, we know that when teens have mental health issues, sometimes they show that sort of withdrawn behavior, but sometimes they also kind of go the other way, right? Where they
Right.
start showing some more externally directed behaviors. So they might act out more. They might get in trouble more often, do some things that are more aggressive or that
Hmm.
are not showing self-regulation. So that might also be a sign that
Mhm.
something's going on with your teen.
So what would you say to an Asian teen who is struggling, but they feel like they can't talk to anyone about it?
Yeah. I think that's really hard to talk with someone who feels like they can't talk to anyone. So I guess the first thing I would try to do is I would try to find some kind of support for that person.
Mhm.
So, whether that's sort of maybe a trusted mentor at school, someone who knows the child or teen would be helpful. But I also would encourage teens to do their best to try, even though it can be hard to talk to a caregiver about it, because really
Right.
they get this kind of support and therapy that many teens are going to need. They're going to need some parental
Yeah.
participation in that, right? So trying to talk to parents about that, or even asking parents to look at some of these resources like you all have come up with the Asian Minds Matter, right? And kind of helping them to understand like, hey, maybe show your parents these kinds of things and hey, this is what I'm feeling right now too. And it kind of to start those conversations.
Mhm.
Right. So now, going on to our closing, if you could give one message to Asian teens struggling with their mental health, what would it be?
Yeah. I think the big thing I would say is don't give up, right? Like we
Right.
need you here, right?
That's huge.
And you are so special. We need you and do what you can to find that support and health. And so I think, there are if you Google, we've got 998, right, which is a suicide prevention line that anyone can call.
Mhm.
There are resources that one can find. I was gonna say them and then all of a sudden they popped out of my mind. But like the SAMHSA's National Helpline, which is one eight
Right.
hundred 662 HELP,
Yeah.
right? NAMI, the National Association for Mental Health, has a NAMI Texas has a line. They have you can actually text friend to 62640, and you can get a helpline specialist. And that's not going to fully help support teens and youth, but it's a nice starting place, right? Especially if teens are in a situation where they need instant support to make sure that they're safe, and then they can get some more resources and get some referrals from there.
Right.
Mhm.
So, Dr. Ho, this has been such an insightful conversation. We learned about risk and protective factors in Asian teens. We learned about signs if a teen is struggling. And thank you so much just for joining us today. If anyone listening wants to learn more about your work in specific, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm at the University of Texas at Dallas. I have a website, Healthy Development Project, and we have a new website actually that's going to come out in the next week or two that'll be
Oh,
updated and have some more resources on it. So, yeah,
okay.
we also have a site on Facebook and we have an Instagram that is currently under renovation, but will also be up soon.
Okay, we'll put that
Mhm.
in the bio of this podcast. But that's it for today's episode of Minds Matter. If you found this conversation helpful, make sure to share it with a friend, follow us for more, and leave a review. And remember, your mental health matters. See you next time.